Alright, so what do we got here? In my book, I like to classify this as an Arc 5 era archetype, but that ain't the truest definition to put him in, because the a monster from this archetype actually appeared in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, the original one used by Yugi Moto, and yeah, it's only one monster, and it's in the Arc 5 era as well, but I classify it as the Arc 5 era archetype because the most notable and defining, and I believe the most plentiful lineup of monsters and cards, one of said monsters, mind you, appeared briefly in Arc 5 and was used by Yu Sakuragi in Arc 5 in a very, very short duel. I believe it was in one turn, and then Yugo popped in to deal with the rest of the Obelisk Force members he was dealing with. So yeah, the Spellbook prophecy archetype, so to call it, is divided into three separate sub-archetypes. The titular Spellbooks, which in its core and the gameplay style is made to be a generic spellcaster boost and support, and most of the spell and trap lineup is very generic in its design and can be splashed into any deck. The most success these guys have seen outside of their dedicated decks is within Fortune Lady decks and several other spellcaster based decks which can abuse the spellbook, the power of the spellbooks. And yeah, they focus on set spell cards. However, there's the prophecy slash Endymion part of the archetype, with Endymion being the sub-archetype within the prophecy archetype. And how is that archetype defined? Basically, anything that can have spell counters on it can be part of said archetype, but not 100% everything, because there are some Dark Magician support cards which can have spell counters on them, so those do not count, and I will be skipping over said cards. The Endymion part of the archetype also has another sub-archetype known as Mythical Beasts, and those are, quite sadly, the weakest link in said archetype. But yeah, the archetype is 70 cards big. It's a pretty sizable archetype, so yeah. Let's get started already and start off with their first monster, Stoic of Prophecy, a level 1 with Kuribo stats of all things. And when this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add a level 3 Prophecy monster from your deck to your hand. It's a cute little effect which was decent or passable back in the day, but I'd like to take a note here that this thing triggers if it's sent to the graveyard by any means, meaning you can actually use it as a link material or send it to the graveyard with some other card effects in order to trigger its effect. However, it only searches level 3 prophecy monsters, which are very rarely ran. Very rarely, I mean, outside of dedicated builds. But yeah, the top tier scoring spellbook decks usually don't run the level 3 prophecy monster, and doesn't even help the fact that the best monster they run 3 staples of isn't even a level 3 itself, but rather a level 2. That level 2 being, of course, the Spellbook Magician of Prophecy. When normal or flips face up, the normal summon the flipped face up, what the hell am I doing with my tongue, allows you to add a Spellbook spell card from your deck to your hand. You can pretty much see why this is ran at 3 at all times, because spellbooks do have lots of consistency options in their design and most of the spell cards, but this is the only monster that is allowed to freely search any member of the spell and trap lineup upon it being normal summoned or flipped face up. I would actually dare to call it a bit outdated in my opinion, since you specifically need to normal summon this thing or flip it face up if you like set it for whatever reason in order to trigger its effects, rather than activating it by if it is normal or special summoned, which would have been greatly appreciated in this day and age. So yeah, that way, it would have been an excellent, well, it is still an excellent target for their next monster, Apprentice Magician. If this card is summoned, target one face-up card on the field that you can place a spell counter on. Place one spell counter on that target, and if this card is destroyed by battle, you can special summon one level 2 or lower spellcaster type monster from your deck in face-down defense position. Yeah, this is actually a very, very old card from an age-old meta, and fun fact, it was actually semi-limited and limited on the ban list for a bit. The new ban list is about to come out any moment now. It's the 13th of January at the time of the recording this video. But yeah, this thing in conjunction with another card, which we'll get into later, were limited because not only can it float into more copies of itself or summon some other monsters. For example, Spellbook Magician of Prophecy works very well in this thing with this thing in older formats, but it can replenish stuff with spell counters, and usually this comes from a way slower format, so this meant the set slow effects could easily go off with this thing's splash ability with spell counters and being able to summon other copies of itself in order to do the pretty much exact same thing. So yeah, nowadays he's not nearly as important or impressive, so yeah, don't bother with this one in my opinion. Next up we have Hermit of Prophecy. Each time a spellbook card is activated, increase this card's level by 2 and attack by 300. Yeah, this is as pointless as it can get, so yeah, no wonder this guy is a hermit, because nobody in their right mind is going to associate with him for being such a terrible monster in this day and age. Next up we have Fool of Prophecy, another level 3, and once per turn you can send a spellbook spell card from your deck to the graveyard. During the end phase of the turn this card activates this effect, you contribute this card to special summon one level 5 or higher dark spellcaster type monster from your deck. You must have 5 or more spellbook spell cards with different names in your graveyard to activate and resolve this effect. Okay, so let me get this straight. You can either waste 5 turns sending 5 spellbook cards with different names to the graveyard with this frail level 3 with a slow ass effect just to be a special summon a level 5 or higher dark spellcaster type monsters, which are not very usually ran since most of their monsters are not quite tolerable, and even those which are ran have special summoning conditions of their own, so yeah, good job making a fool of yourself. Anyway, next up we have Temperance of Prophecy. During your main phase, if you have activated the spellbook spell card previously this turn, you contribute this card, special summon one level 5 light or dark spellcaster type monster from your deck. You cannot special summon another level 5 or higher monster during the turn you activate this effect. It's a bit better than the Fool, but the cracks quickly start to show. Yeah, the activation condition is way better. It still requires this thing to be you need to tribute it in order to activate this effect. However, you can also special summon light spellcaster type monsters, which are more plentifully ran here. But the best light spellcaster type monster you can summon with this has a special summoning condition, which is very easily fulfilled. There is a certain level 8 monster that highly benefits from this somewhat, but yeah, that's about as far as this thing goes. So yeah, if you really want to abuse this sort of effect for links or anything, I'd say run 1 if you really feel like it. Next up we have Justice of Prophecy. During your end phase, if you have activated a spellbook spell card previously this turn, you can banish this card from the field and add both one level 5 or higher light or dark spellcaster type monster and one spellbook spell card from your deck to your hand, and you can only use this effect once per turn. There we go, this is something pretty neat. This is the first level 3 I would actually call relevant to run, since, you know, it's a double searcher of both back row and monsters, and it banishes itself, but there are more than one ways to retrieve her if you want to pull off this effect more than once. However, I do have a bit of a grudge over this card, since the search happens during the end phase, but then again, Genex Neutron is again barely passable for the time, so yeah, I'll cut this thing for some slack for being a double searcher and being in a better archetype. Next up we have Amores of Prophecy. Once per turn, you can reveal one Spellbook spell card in your hand, special summon one level 4 or lower spellcaster type monster from your hand. Potentially useful effect, but we have another better, higher level monster which can pretty much special summon only itself, and that's basically the only thing which you might need. But still, it's a very welcome addition if you plan to build a Link-centric build involving your spellbooks. So yeah, you can splash in a couple of them, but then again, spellbooks tend to activate a lot of their spell cards. So yeah, you might want to run out of targets to cycle through pretty quickly. So yeah, watch out for this one, in my opinion. Alright, stepping away from the spellbook lineup for a bit. Now we move on to the Endymion part of the archetype. First of which is Rogue of Endymion. If this card is normal or special summon, place one spell counter on it. You can remove one spell counter from this card, and discard one spellcaster monster. Set one continuous spell directly from your deck, but for the rest of this turn, you cannot activate it, or activate cards or the effects with its name. You can only use each effect of Rogue of Endymion once per turn. Fluffle Bear, this isn't. Yeah, it's more like Rogue of Endymion. Don't get me wrong, you can fetch any continuous spell card with this thing, such as maybe Solidarity, Messenger of Peace, Level Limit Area B. Yeah, I'm just kind of pointing in the dark, but yeah, you can. Not only do you have to remove a spell counter from this card, which this archetype does not have any consistent way of splashing set spell counters on themselves, besides maybe Apprentice Magician. But you also have to discard a spellcaster type monster, which you'd usually want to save up for something better. Yeah, I wouldn't bother with this one if I were you. Anyway, next up we have, oh boy, Armor XA. Oh, I can't wait to hear the restriction on this one. It's a level 4 with 2400 attack points, and this card cannot attack in the same turn it is normal summoned, flipped summoned, or special summoned. Good lord. During each of your and your opponent's standby phases, remove one spell counter on your side of the field, or if you do not, destroy this card. Yeah, it's Boar Soldier, but of the exact same usefulness as Boar Soldier. I have no idea what they were thinking. Yeah, I know it comes from a way slower and way more fragile meta where a monster with 2000 attack points and a level lower than 5 was a sacrilege on the field to see, so they had to make several revisions and rulings and what have you in order to keep them on the field as less as possible, and this is like the prime example of this. So yeah, don't bother with this one. Next up we have the very old and very fabled Breaker the Magical Warrior. Also a resident from the ban list from the same period as Apprentice Magician, and here's why. If this card is normal summoned, you can place one spell counter on it. You can now only have one of them on this monster, and gains 300 attack for each spell counter on it, and you can remove one spell counter on it and target one spell or trap on the field, destroy that target. Okay, so here's the deal. Upon it being normal summoned, it turns into a 1900 beat stick, which is already beyond amazing for the time this thing came out, and you can also remove said spell counter in order to pop any piece of back row at, well, any time. Well, again, it's not Mythical Space Typhoon, but you get what I mean. Mythical Space Typhoon was a heavily played card. It was on the verge of being banned, and this card follows the philosophy of every archetype needing at least one way of getting rid of back row, no matter how inconsistent and over the top it may be. So, yeah. It's not really worth running nowadays because there are way better options out there, but the only thing I can sort of take him for is being a target for Ties of the Brethren, because it can swarm a bit with some of other non-archetypal spellcaster which can be welcome in the deck. So there's that option, or just not running him and making some room for some other consistent pieces of support. Next up we have Defender the Magical Knight, polar opposite of Breaker. as this one has 1,000 more defense points than our Fable Breaker. And if this card is normal summon, you can place a spell counter on it. Also, it can only carry maximum of 1. Once per turn, if a spellcaster monster on the field would be destroyed, you can remove 1 spell counter from your field or for each of those monsters instead. I'm really biased toward this one. This is a very early prototype of the Cipher type of protection it can offer. It can also it can also carry 1 spell counter, which is I find beyond baffling, despite not gaining attack for the 1 counter it has. I understood it with Breaker because Breaker gained an additional attack point, so if he could carry multiples, he could transform into a legit high beat stick. With 1 more, he would become a 2200 beat stick, which was pretty okay for the time. And this one, despite not gaining attack points, feels... I mean, I would have allowed him and then back in the day to place more than 1 of them, especially for the type of protection it offers. So yeah, again, it's a very slow card and you should probably do better without it. Next up we have Crusader of Endymion. It's a level 4 with 1900 attack and it's a Gemini monster. Oh boy, what joy. Anyway, its Gemini effect is that once per turn you can target a face-up monster on the field and that you can place a spell counter on and place 1 spell counter on it, and if you do, this card gains 600 attack until the end of this turn. Okay, so you can summon this thing twice in order to be to make it into a soft once per turn spell counter generator, just to make it into a level 4 2500 attack beat stick, which for the time was alright and really good. Or you can just special summon more monsters or go into higher beat sticks from your extra deck. The choices are yours and yours alone. And no, don't get me started on some players who might utilize the effect of Catalyst Field in order to make this thing into the next generation beat stick of death, because it ain't gonna work. Next up we jump into the Mythical Beast territory, first of which is Mythical Beast Cerberus, their only non-pendulum monster. Yes, this archetype does have pendulum monsters, so yay. Each time a spell card is activated, place 1 spell counter on this card. When that spell card resolves, this card gains 500 attack for each spell counter on it. If damage calculation is conducted involving this card, remove spell counters from it at the end of the battle phase. Yeah, what this thing amounts to is being a spell counter holder, and that's about it, because it was the contra logic of Ape Fighter, if you remember my Ape archetype analysis. Basically, Ape Fighter is a beat stick which can become a really large beat stick if you keep the flow going. Basically, whenever it destroys a monster, he gains another 400 attack. Even if it doesn't destroy a monster, his attack gained by this effect is reset back to its original attack before he gained all those attack. And you can actually build a very fun and quite a bit inconsistent FTK deck with this card, with Ape Fighter. Well, this thing really does not card it. I mean, it's a target for Ties of the Brethren, if nothing else, and yeah. Now we move on back to the Spellbook cards. First of which we have Strength of Prophecy. Once per turn you can shuffle 1 Spellbook spell card from your graveyard into the deck, then target 1 face-up spellcaster type monster on the field, increase its level by 1 and its attack by 500. Yeah, you can use this to recycle your spell cards, but there are way better ways of going around that rather than relying on this redhead. Such a shame of design, but yeah, the only thing you had to make me run her is to make her look like this, but unfortunately we're not in that show, so yeah, don't bother with this one. Next up we have Charioteer of Prophecy, their final level 4. Once per turn you can discard 1 Spellbook spell card to target 1 spellcaster type monster in your graveyard, add that to your target to your hand. I appreciate it's generic in terms of what it allows you to bring back from the graveyard, but discarding spell cards kind of goes against the logic of the deck, because most spell cards tend to be activated right away and to get their fantastic benefits. So yeah, you can basically, you might want to use this if somehow the opponent locks you out of spell cards, which I highly doubt is going to happen outside of Horus decks yeah, only Horus decks can basically lock lock these guys out of spell cards, or Imperial Order if someone actually still runs it. I'm probably right on this one, but yeah, you get the point. Now moving on to their tribute monsters, first of which we have Emperor of Prophecy. You can banish both one face-up spellcaster type monster you control, except discard, and one spellbook card from your graveyard to target one face-up monster opponent controls. Take control of that target until the end phase. You can only use this effect of Emperor of Prophecy once per turn. This card cannot attack during the turn you activate this effect. I don't understand at all why the hell can't you banish this thing in order to activate this effect, because it would actually be a very fun archetypal enemy controller, and I would highly appreciate it. But no, you need to have at least another spellcaster monster on the field in order to utilize the snatch effect. And yeah, you might as well just run Mind Control, Brain Control, or Borreload Dragon if you feel like taking no control of monsters. Don't bother with this one. Next up we have Reaper of Prophecy, our level 6, our first level 6, since the previous one was the only level 5. And it has a plethora of effects, first of which is this one. When this card is normal or special summon, you can activate this effect. Apply as many effects as possible based on the number of Spellbook spell cards with different names in your graveyard. You can only use this effect of Reaper of Prophecy once per turn. 3 or more. This card gains 600 attack. 4 or more. Add one Spellbook spell card from your deck to your hand. 5 or more. Special summon one level 5 or higher Dark Spellcaster type monster from your deck. I mean, everything besides the first effect is alright, even though the special summoning is also not that spectacular, since most other monsters tend to have their own special summoning conditions. So yeah. However, the search effect is actually pretty good, but it's somewhat outclassed by the Spellbook Magician of Prophecy, which is a better card in my opinion. So yeah, run if you really feel like it. Okay, the next one we have is Prophecy Destroyer. No, it's not their final level 6. If this card is in your graveyard, you can banish 3 Spellbook spell cards from your graveyard. Special summon this card from your graveyard. I guess you can maybe use this as a niche comeback option, but I really don't see the point, since Spellbooks don't particularly like to banish their own Spellbook spell cards, so maybe if you can actually find some way to retrieve them, which I highly doubt at this point, you can utilize this thing's revival effect. I mean, you can also use them for link spamming, but yeah, this effect isn't even once per turn, so yeah, you can experiment with it alright, but otherwise I wouldn't advise running it. Next up we have Breaker the Dark Magical Warrior. If this card is normal summon, you can place 2 spell counters on it, and if it is Pendulum summoned, you can place 3 spell counters on it. It gains 400 attack for each spell counter on it, and you can remove 1 spell counter from this card and target 1 spell or trap on the field, destroy it. You can only use this effect of Breaker the Dark Magical Warrior once per turn. It's Breaker the Magical Warrior, but bigger and a bit better. Well, not by much, so yeah, not worth it in my opinion. Next up we have Endymion the Master Magician, our first level 7. You can special summon this card from your hand or graveyard by removing 6 spell counters from a magical Citadel Endymion you control. If summoned this way, target 1 spell in your graveyard, add that target to your hand, and once per turn you can discard 1 spell, then target 1 card on the field and destroy that target. The second effect is a bit better than, or say, Perform Appel Slate Hand Magician, but at the cost of discarding spell cards, which the archetype does not particularly benefit from. However, what is very likable about this card is that it can actually recycle your spell cards. And I mean, well, any spell card that it can recycle. So yeah, you can actually recycle some pretty powerful spell cards with this thing, and yeah. However, the special summoning condition for this thing is to remove 6 spell counters from a magical Citadel of Endymion. We'll get to that. It's one of their one of their field spells, and one of the easier cards to rack up spell counters with. So the special summoning condition shouldn't be that much of a problem, but still, I'd watch out for the ratios. However, a lot better is the High Priestess of Prophecy. This is a level 7 with 2500 attack and 2100 defense, Dark Magician stats, somewhat. And you can reveal 3 spellbook spells in your hand, special summon this card from your hand. Once per turn you can banish 1 spellbook spell card from your hand or greater than target 1 card on the field and destroy that target. You run 3 of all times, it's simple as that. Not only is the cost of special summoning this baby basically free, but you can also banish spellbook spells from your graveyard in order to pop the field. So yeah. And the effect is also a soft once per turn, meaning if you open up with multiples, not only do you get a rank 7 out of it, you can also basically clear 3 cards, up to 3 cards with this. Sure, you need to banish spellbook spell cards for this, but for an effect like this and versatility in the summoning department as this, it's pretty warranted. Absolutely max out on this. Next up we have their first level raid, that being Wheel of Prophecy. When this card is special summoned by the effect of a spellcaster type monster, you can target any number of your banished spellbook spell cards, shuffle them into the deck, and if you do, return your other banished spellbook spell cards to your graveyard. You can only use the effect of Wheel of Prophecy once per turn. Okay, so not only is this the only monster among the spellbook lineup that can retrieve your spellbook cards that are banished, at a very specific condition, mind you, and then also its effect is worded very weirdly. Basically, what this card entails is you can target any number of your spellbook cards that are banished, and return them to and basically shuffle them into the deck, and any other ones you get to return to the graveyard which you didn't pick. So the ones you want to be in your graveyard, you get to leave in the graveyard. You can basically choose maybe one or none, and then revive all of them, well, place them back into the graveyard. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird effect. So yeah, does it make it worth running? Well, it's the only card that can return its spellbooks. I believe it's the only card actually that can return spellbooks into the graveyard. So yeah, run by one out of obligation, if anything. Anyway, next up, their last non-pendulum main deck monster is the level 9 World of Prophecy. Yeah, these are also based on Arcana Force cards. Yeah, it really makes me sad how badly Arcana Force, the archetype, was actually utilized. Anyway, when this card is special summoned by the effect of a spellcaster type monster or a spellbook spell card, there we go, a bit better, you can target 2 spellbook spell cards in your graveyard, add those targets to your hand. You cannot special summon other monsters during the turn you activate this effect. When you add a card to your hand by this effect, you can reveal 4 spellbook cards with different names in your hand, destroy all other cards on the field. Yeah, a nuke at its finest, ladies and gentlemen, but yeah, this one, it can be a bit too finicky to pull off, since you need to have 4 or more spellbook spell cards at the time when you activate this kind of effect. If you don't, or if your opponent accidentally sends it to the graveyard with something like, I don't know, Cypher or Omega, and I believe, I don't actually know if his random discard is a quick effect or not, but yeah, you get the point. You get to experience a very nice and flashy field nuke. So yeah, worth for experimentation. So yeah, let me know how the experiment works. It is a good card, but yeah, you should experiment with it a bit before utilizing it to the fullest. Alright, now moving on to the Pendulum territory, first of which we have the Mythical Beast Jackal. It's a level 1 with 0 attack and 1400 defense, scale 4. And its pendulum effect is that if you have no card in your other pendulum zone, you can target one face-up card you control that you can place a spell counter on, destroy this card, and if you do place one spell counter on that card, you can only use this effect of Mythical Beast Jackal once per turn. And its monster effect is that each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter. When it resolves, you can remove 3 spell counters from your field and tribute this card. Special summon one Mythical Beast effect monster from your deck, except Mythical Beast Jackal. Okay, there's quite a bit to unpack here. First of all, the pendulum effect is downright horseshit and one of the slowest freaking spell counter generators I've ever seen. And which also goes all against the logic of every single pendulum deck. So yeah, basically, this is the puppy that Wavering I guess keeps laughing at and calling it a mutt. And the monster effect, Jesus, what went wrong here? I mean, it is special summoning from the deck, but effect monsters, first of all, Mythical Beasts don't have any vanilla monsters, if you were all wondering. And second of all, there's only one monster worth to summon with this effect, and even that isn't good enough to warrant running this, so no, not worth it. Next up we have Servant of Endymion. This is a level 3, scale 2. And its pendulum effect is that each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter on this card. When that spell resolves, you can remove 3 spell counters from this card. Special summon both this card from your pendulum zone and one monster from your deck with 1000 or more attack that you can place a spell counter on. And if you do, place one spell counter on each. And its monster effect is that you can only special summon Servant of Endymion once per turn. This card with all spell counters, with a spell counter, can attack directly. Once per turn, once per opponent's turn actually. Quick effect, you can discard one card, place one spell counter on each card you control, then you can place one spell counter on, that you can place a spell counter on in the first place. And if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place one spell counter, you can place this card in your pendulum zone, then place the same number of spell counters on that if it had as a monster. Jesus Christ! This effect is so worded it makes my head spin. I wasn't really deliberately misreading that. I literally got a headache from reading that effect. Basically what you need to know here is that she is a direct attacker, which is kind of pointless with this kind of effect. But she places spell counters harder than anything else we've seen so far, and that should basically warrant running this at 3. Somewhat. Yeah, still don't max out on it because there are much better options in this day and age. Next up we have another level 3, that being Magister of Endymion. It's a level 3, but scale 8 this time around, and each time a spell card is activated, the pendulum effect, place one spell counter on this card. When that spell resolves, you can remove 3 spell counters from this card. Special summon both this card and one from your pendulum zone and one face-up monster from your extra deck that you can place a spell counter on, and if you do, place one spell counter on each. You can special summon one Magister of Endymion once per turn. When this card declares an attack, you can place one spell counter on it. Once per opponent's turn, quick effect, you can remove 3 spell counters from your field, special summon one monster from your deck that you can place a spell counter on. And if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place this card in your pendulum zone and place the same number of spell counters on it that it had as a monster. Again, it's a different flavor of Servant, and it really shows. They have very similarities in terms of their stats and even artwork and, well, effect overall. But yeah, you usually run the same number of each. So if you run one of Servant, you run one of Endymion, one of Magister, and so on and so forth. So yeah, any of them particularly good when teamed up? They're different. They're a bit different than what their than their usual monster map. So yeah, we're heavily in the Endymion part of the archetype where spell counters are pretty rampant. So yeah, decent enough, but not much harder staples. Oh boy, now we're moving on to Mythical Beasts for a while. First of which we have Mythical Beast Basilisk, our first level 4 in the Pendulum department, scale 4 as well. If you have no card in your other Pendulum zone, Pendulum effect, you can destroy this card, and if you do, shuffle one face-up spellcaster Pendulum monster from your exotic into the main deck, except Basilisk, and you then draw one card. You can only use this effect of a Mythical Beast Basilisk once per turn. Each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter on this card, and when that spell resolves, you can remove 3 spell counters from your field, return one Mythical Beast card from your Pendulum zone, or face up from your exotic to the hand, and you can only use this effect of Mythical Beast Basilisk once per turn. Yeah, like the other Mythical Beast, this one isn't worth discussing further. It's their biggest beat stick out of the low level department, so yeah, that's the only thing it's got going for it, but other than that, it's got nothing else. Let's just move on. Next up we have Mythical Beast Garuda, another scale 4, and if you have no cards in your other Pendulum zone, you can target one other spell and trap on the field, destroy both it and this card. You can only use this effect on Mythical Beast Garuda once per turn. Each monster effect, each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter, and when your opponent normal or special summons a monster, except during the damage step, you can remove 3 spell counters from your field, special summon this card from your hand, and then return the opponent's monster special summon. The opponent summon monsters to the hand. You can only use this effect of Mythical Beast Garuda once per turn. The Pendulum effect is slightly better Foucault's Cannon, while the monster effect is a way too costly compulsory evacuation device, so yeah, you're better off just running compulsory at that point. Next up we have Mythical Beast Medusa, another level 4, which is also a scale 4, and this is actually the last scale 4, the level 4, sorry. And its Pendulum effect is that if you have no card in your other Pendulum zone, you can target one monster in your graveyard that you can place a spell counter on, destroy this card, and if you do, special summon that monster, and if you do, place one spell counter on it. You can only use this effect of Mythical Beast Medusa once per turn. Its monster effect is that each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter on this card, and when that spell resolves, once per turn during the battle phase quick effect, you can remove 2 spell counters from your field, then target one face-up monster on the field. Its attack and defense become half its current attack until the end of this turn. Or you can be not a complete dunce and run freaking Blackwing Gale, the Whirlwind. Yeah. Anyway, next up we have Mythical Beast Jackal, our first level 6 and only level 6 in the Pendulum department. And it's a scale 4 as well, and its Pendulum effect is that if you have no cards in your other Pendulum zone, you can destroy this card, and if you do, special summon one face-up Mythical Beast Pendulum monster from your extra deck, except Mythical Beast Jackal King, and you can only use this effect once per turn, and its monster effect is each time a spell card is activated, you can place 2 spell counters on this card when that spell resolves, and once per turn, when an opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect, you can remove 2 spell counters from your field, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Okay, so basically the monster effect is pretty alright if we do completely ignore the fact that we need a certain amount of spell counters in order to basically make the best use of it. Gamma Seal, this ain't. So yeah, it really isn't nothing that much special. I believe you can call it the second best Mythical Beast, even though we haven't shown off the last one, and it's gonna be a bit of a journey until we get to him. But for now we're returning to the pure Endymion goodness, first of which we have Reflection of Endymion. It's our first level 7 and it's a scale 2 with 1850 attack for that Evil Swarm experience. And its Pendulum effect is that each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter. You can remove 3 spell counters from this card, special summon both this card from your Pendulum zone and one monster from your hand that you can place a spell counter on, and if you do, place one spell counter on each. And Pendulum effect is that when you can only special summon one Reflection of Endymion per turn. I don't know why only the first 3 Endymion Pendulum monsters have this effect, but here we are. And in the rest of the effect goes that once per turn, if this card is special summon, you can target one card on your opponent controls, and if you one card you control with a spell counter, except this card, return that opponent's card and your card to the hand, and then place the same number of spell counters on this card as that your returned card had. And when this card with a spell counter is destroyed by battle card effect, you can add one Endymion card from your deck to your hand. The last effect I would heavily appreciate if this was a low level monster, not a level 7 with 1850 attack. What were they thinking, god damn it? But yeah, it's a very mediocre piece of support, so yeah, it's basically ran by preference, if anything. And the last level 7 in the pendulum department is Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic. And it's a scale 8, 2800 attack, and its pendulum effect is that you can remove 6 spell counters from your field, special summon this card from the pendulum zone. Then count the number of cards you control that can have a spell counter, destroy up to that many cards on the field, and if you do, place spell counters on this card equal to the number of cards destroyed. You can only use this effect of Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic, once per turn. Monster effect is that once per turn, when a spell or trap or effect is activated, quick effect, you can return one card you control with a spell counter to the hand. And if you do, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. And then you can place the same number of spell counters on that card that the returned card had. While this card has a spell counter, your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. Also, it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. When this card with a spell counter is destroyed by battle, you can add a normal spell from your deck to your hand. Yeah, this is pretty obviously the boss monster of the Endymion lineup. So, yeah, it allows you to add any normal spell card from your deck to your hand upon it being destroyed. However, in terms of searchability, it's outclassed by Cyber's Clock Dragon, as that card allowed you to add any spell card from your deck to your hand upon it being sent away. So yeah, it is the be-all end-all boss monster of the Endymion lineup. So yeah, it should be run accordingly. It's a target for Allure of Darkness, it's a rank 7 enabler, so yeah, run a few of these. And their final main deck monster is the final Mythical Beast card, the best one among them, that being Mythical Beast Master Cerberus, their first and only level 8. It's another scale 4, as always. And if you have no card in your other pendulum zone, you can destroy this card, and if you add one level 7 or lower Mythical Beast effect monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use the effect of Mythical Beast Cerberus, Master Cerberus, once per turn. Its monster effect is that each time a spell card is activated, place 2 spell counters on this card when that spell resolves. Cannot be destroyed by card effects while 4 more spell counters are on the field. Once per turn, you can remove 4 spell counters from your field, then target one monster your opponent controls, banish it face up, and if you do, this card gains attack equal to the banished monster's original attack until the end of the opponent's turn. Yeah, it's the best monster, but it doesn't really say much since Cyframe Lord Omega is a thing, so yeah. Feel free to experiment with it, but don't expect it to produce too many long-lasting results. Next up we move on to the extra deck, first of which we start off with the level 6 Synchro monster, Tempest Magician. It requires a tuner and one or more non-tuner spellcaster type monsters, has 2200 attack and 1400 defense. And when this card is synchro summoned, you can place one spell counter on it. Once per turn, you can discard any number of cards that will place one spell counter on a monster you control for each card you discarded. You can remove all spell counters on the field to inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each removed spell counter. A GX Era Synchro monster. Now that's something I rarely see every day. Now don't take this seriously. It isn't a Synchro monster released during the GX Era. That would be impossible because GX Era was never allowed to have good monsters. Anyway. But yeah, you get the point. It's a very, very bad spell counter generator that swallows all of your resources just to become a GX Era burn engine. And yeah, but the funny thing is, this thing is actually ran quite often in spellcaster synchro decks because the poor bastards don't have anything better to go into. If they can't afford level 7 and above. One of Set's level 7 Synchro Monsters is their final Synchro Monster, that being Arcanite Magician, who you might remember from my Assault Mode video. And I thought that it was part of the Assault Mode lineup because, well, I have no idea what kind of damage I had that day, but anyway, yeah, Arcanite Magician is part of this archetype, not the Assault Mode archetype. A Colossal Fighter is, because there isn't a single archetype based around him. I checked thoroughly after that video. Anyway, this guy has the same summoning condition as Tempest Magician, only it has 400 attack and 1800 defense, and it's one level higher. And if this card is Synchro Summoned, place 2 spell counters on it. This card gains 1000 attack for each spell counter on it. You can remove 1 spell counter from this card, and then target 1 card your opponent controls, destroy that target. So yeah, a very powerful removal effect which isn't even locked to a once per turn. You tend to summon this in defense position, then pop 2 cards, and then go a special summon a level 1 tuner and go into Crystal Wing. Simple and easy. So yeah, it's a fantastic card for Spellcaster Synchro decks, and Spellcaster and a fantastic monster for, well, being a very nice monster indeed. So yeah, great card overall. However, there's also a fusion version of this, that being Supreme Arcanite Magician. It's their only fusion monster, so yeah, we won't be sticking on for that long. It's a level 10, requires a spellcaster type synchro monster and any spellcaster monster as material. Has 1000 more attack and defense than the original Arcanite. And this monster can only be special summoned by fusion summon from the extra deck, and with this card is fusion summon, you can place 2 spell counters on it just like the original, gains 1000 attack for each spell counter just like the original, and once per turn you can remove 1 spell counter from your side of the field to activate one of the following effects. Select 1 card on the field and destroy it, or draw 1 card. Yeah, at the cost of being a bit more trickier to summon, you basically get a more powerful magician with a bit of more restrictions over its effects, as the previous one was not a once per turn. However, this one offers you more benefits for being a once per turn effect. You can either go plus or basically pop the field like the original could offer. So yeah, run by preference. It couldn't hurt possibly. Alright, now moving on to the Link monsters. First of which we have Crowley the First Professor, the Link 2. Points bottom left and bottom right. 1000 attack, requires 2 spellcaster monsters as material, and if this card is link summoned, you can reveal 3 spellbook cards with different names from your deck, and your opponent randomly picks one for you to add to your hand. Also shuffle the rest into the deck. Also, you can also use this effect of Crowley the First Professor once per turn. Each turn, 1 level 5 or higher spellcaster monster you control can be normal summoned without tributing. So yeah, the second effect essentially replaces the need for all those monsters which can special summon the things from the deck. However, they can still be useful on occasion. But this thing basically kickstarts the 90% of all spellcaster decks, because not only can you search a spellbook card right when it's link summoned, but it also allows to special summon high level spellcasters, which is always nice. And it has the really great arrows for a link monster of its caliber. Absolutely max out on this one. Not so much can be said about Daybreaker the Shining Magical Warrior. And this one is also a Link 2, which requires 2 spellcaster monsters, has 1600 attack, and if this card is Link summoned, you place 1 spell counter on it, gains 300 attack for each spell counter on it, and you can only use each of the following effects of Daybreaker the Shining Magical Warrior once per turn. If a spellcaster monster is special summoned to a zone this card points to, place 1 spell counter on this card. Or you can remove 2 spell counters from this card to target 1 card on the field and destroy it. Meh, just don't bother with this one. It's a bit on the slower side, and spell counters can take a bit of time to generate, and you might not always have this thing available for utilizing its effect to the fullest. So yeah, Crowley is the much better option in my opinion. Next up we have the final Link monster, that being Selene the Sacred Sovereign of Magic, with a beautiful design. Anyway, it's a link tree which points down, bottom left, and bottom right. It requires 2 or more monsters, including a spellcaster monster. Has 1850 attack for that Evil Swarm experience again. And if this card is link summoned, you can place spell counters on this card equal to the number of spells on the field and in the graveyards. While an Endymion monster card is on the field, your opponent's monsters cannot target this card for attacks. Once per turn, during the main phase, quick effect, you can remove 3 spell counters from your field, special summon 1 spellcaster monster from your hand or graveyard in defense position to a zone this card points to. Honestly, it's a crying shame this never came to the TCG, because this card is packed with so many great effects and consistency boosting that it's downright hilarious. Being able to splash itself with multiple spell counters, well, this is basically the Archetype's most consistent spell counter generator, which pretty much speaks volume why this thing is ran at 3 at all times. Basically any Endymion and Spellbook build, and it can also bring back monsters for extra linking. What's not to like here, other than the fact that this thing is still not in the TCG? So yeah, absolutely max out on this thing whenever it may be imported into the TCG. God knows how long that'll take, since we have Needle Fiber as an example, or Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. Not that much, but Meteor Black Dragon is a much more better example, because no one in the right mind was losing their mind over freaking Ultimate Dragon. Well, yeah, you get the point. Now we move on to their final 2 monsters, those being the Xyz monsters. First of which we have the rank 5 Empress of Prophecy. Requires 2 level 5 spellcaster type monsters, and this card gains 300 attack for each Xyz material attached to a monster you control. And once per turn, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card, shuffle your deck, then excavate the top 5 cards of your deck, destroy monsters on the field up to the number of spellbook cards excavated. Also, after that, place the excavated cards on the top of your deck in any order. I have no idea what the hell the purpose of shuffling your deck before this thing's effect going off was supposed to be, but I don't know, but I believe some of the... Ah, yes, it actually, there exists one card in the archetype that allows you to set your deck up. Well, I believe the first 3 cards, so if this thing did not shuffle the deck, you would be guaranteed 3 pops, which I believe would be a bit too powerful for the time. So to mitigate that, they were very clever. But still, it's not something to write home about, so yeah, it is a potentially useful effect, but not by much. Run 1 or 2 of these. Next up we have the final monster, that being Hierophant of Prophecy, which is the only monster that appeared in Arc 5, which made this review eligible. Anyway, it's a rank 7, which requires 2 level 7 spellcaster type monsters, and once per turn you can detach a material from this card to destroy spell or trap as your opponent controls up to the number of spellbook spell cards in your graveyard. So yeah, this kind of thing can actually become a pretty devastated field clearer, because you tend to have a lot of spellbook cards in your graveyard. You will basically be guaranteed 3 to 4 destructions per turn. So yeah, great card, and yeah, another proof that rank 7s are one of the best ranks in the game. Alright, we've done enough for the monster lineup. Now move on to the spell cards. Let's start off with the most notable one, the spellbooks. First of which we have Spellbook of Secrets. Add 1 spellbook card from your deck to your hand except Spellbook of Secrets, and you can only activate 1 Spellbook of Secrets once per turn. Simple consistency boosting. If you thought the Spellbook Magician of Prophecy didn't search as much, well, now you have basically the near tune table of contents type of searcher. But yeah, and yeah, the gimmick that you can only activate 1 of these per turn is shared among all the spellbook cards, I believe. Most of them, if not all of them, so yeah. Next of which being Spellbook of Power. Target 1 spellcaster monster you control. This turn it gains 1000 attack, and if it does during each time it destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can add a spellbook spell from your deck to your hand. You can only activate 1 Spellbook of Power per turn. This was basically a kick-ass searcher because you can basically search this thing with Spellbook of Secrets, turn a spellcaster monster into a massive beatstick, and that massive beatstick proceeds to search out more spellbooks. Beautiful, I tell you. One of the prime reasons why spellbooks were a top tier deck that can even shut down and compare to Dragon Rulers. It's a masterpiece in my opinion. It's, yeah, run max out on the previous one and this one, ASAP. Next up we have Spellbook of Knowledge. Send to the graveyard one spellcaster monster or one other spellbook card from your hand to or face up from the field to the graveyard, except Spellbook of Knowledge. And if you do draw 2 cards, you can only activate 1 Spellbook of Knowledge per turn. Run 3, and I'm gonna not repeat myself any further. Move on. Next up we have Spellbook of Eternity. Target one of your banished spellbook spell cards, except Spellbook of Eternity. Add that target to your hand. And yeah, this is your other way to retrieve your banished stuff, and it works. It's not the best at it, but it is very versatile, so I'd recommend running 2 or 3 of these. Spellbook of Wisdom is their other card. It's a quick play this time around, and it allows you to target a spellcaster monster on the field and activate one of these effects. It makes him unaffected by spell cards or trap cards. The choices are yours and yours alone. Honestly, this is a very versatile effect, especially for the time. And it basically explains why spellbooks were able to stand up to full power Dragon Rulers back in their days. So, yeah, a phenomenal card for its time period, but yeah. I'm most likely going to be triggering the first effect, or maybe in a trap heavy focus deck which runs a lot of floodgates, maybe the second effect, but yeah, in my eyes I see the first effect being pulled off more often than the second one. But still, it's an absolute staple. Then next up we have Spellbook of the Master. If you control a spellcaster type monster, you can reveal one other spellbook card in your hand, then target one spellbook normal spell card in your graveyard, except Spellbook of the Master. This card's effect becomes that target's effect. You can only activate one Spellbook of the Master per turn. So yeah, if you thought you need extra punching power or with Spellbook of Power, or basically extra searching with secrets, this is your option. This is another very excellent 3-off staple, and you can also activate Spellbook of Wisdom's effect again and make it unaffected by trap cards. Beautiful! I mean, awesome. Yeah, I'm not gonna explain any further. This is a fantastic card. You should go run it. Next up we have Spellbook of Fate, another very broken card. If you control a spellcaster type monster, you can banish up to 3 spellbook cards from your graveyard and apply this effect depending on the number of spell cards banished for this card's activation. You can only activate one of these per turn, of course. 1. Return one spell or trap on the field to the hand. 2. Change one monster on the field to face down defense position. Or 3. Banish one card your opponent controls. Okay, so the first effect ain't nothing special. The second is also in this day and age nothing too special, although it was actually pretty heavily used to shut down Dragon Rulers. Well, I keep saying because Dragon Rulers was such an overpowered deck at the time. But the third one is just so freaking good that I cannot describe to you. It's basically a mini Trishula with basically being a spell card, since this thing does not target. This thing does not target. It's a masterpiece, I tell you. Run 3 at all times. And not to mention you can use Spellbook of the Master in order to use it multiple times. Although you need to have some resources in order to utilize it, so yeah, watch out for that. Next up we have Spellbook of Miracles. Target one spellcaster type Xyz monster in your graveyard and up to 2 of your banished spellbook spell cards. Special summon that monster, and if you do, attach the targeted spellbook cards to it as Xyz material. You can only activate one of these per turn. As we've seen, their Xyz monsters are nothing too special with the exception of Hierophant. So yeah, you can use it to revive Hierophant, and that's about it. This is by far the worst spellbook card we've seen, so yeah. Next up we have Spellbook of Life, an equip spell this time around. Banish one spellcaster type monster from your graveyard and reveal one other spellbook spell card in your hand. To target one spellcaster type monster in your graveyard, special summon that target in face of attack position and equip it with this card. The equipped monster's level is increased by the level of the monster that was banished for this card's activation, and you can only activate one spellbook of life per turn. This is the worst spellbook card for several reasons. Yeah, sure, you can search it in order to, well, search it out and gain easier access to it. It's an equip spell, which goes against the logic of spell books, as you need to have some of them in the graveyard in order to have access to, if you want to banish them to further the further effects. But yeah, it's a very bad revival card at its most. So yeah, that's about all that there is to it. But screw all that, I know what you came here to see. The final proper spellbook card, when we get to the other support cards in the spellbook lineup. That being the ever so unstoppable Spellbook of Judgment. During the end phase of the turn this card was activated, add spellbook cards from your deck to your hand, except Spellbook of Judgment, up to the number of spell cards activated after this card's resolution. Then you can special summon from your deck one spellcaster type monster whose level is less than or equal to the number of cards added to your hand by this effect. And of course the standard spellbook once per turn restriction that you can only activate one of these per turn. And for a good reason, because this thing is broken and banned. Shit you not, this was a one card out well, one card out in quotes, to Dragon Rulers and basically everything and everything. After this card even got banned, spellbooks were still a very heavily played meta deck, and it really shows into the power of these spellbooks. Not only does this card allow you to go +7, averagely +7, it also allowed you to special summon basically any spellcaster, say depending on the level, of course. And yeah, it was a pretty dang broken mess, and it's banned for a reason. If it ever comes off the ban list, absolutely max out on it. You won't regret it. Alright, now moving on to their other stuff. We have their field spell, the Grand Spellbook Tower. Once per turn during your standby phase, if you have a spellcaster type monster on your side of the field or in your graveyard, you can place one spellbook spell card from your graveyard on the bottom of your deck, except Grand Spellbook Tower, then draw one card. When this card is in your possession, is destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one spellcaster monster from your hand or deck whose level is less than or equal to the number of spellbook spell cards in your graveyard. Potentially good, but it has its ups and downs. First of all, it places your spellbooks on the bottom of your deck, which is you would most likely want them to have them on the top of your deck. But hey, Spellbook of Secrets is here, and Spellbook of Magician of Prophecy. So yeah, it has a very flimsy protection in order to offer you a +1, but other than that, it's really nothing too amazing. Anyway, next up we have Spellbook Library of the Heliosphere. If you have 5 or more Spellbook spell cards in your graveyard, excavate the top 2 cards of your deck, add any excavated Spellbook spells to your hand, also shuffle the rest into the deck. You can only activate on Spellbook Library or Heliosphere per turn, and you cannot activate any spell cards the turn you activate this card except Spellbook spell cards. Yeah, if you really want to play a digging game with this, then just go play Sylvans. Yeah, Spellbook of Secrets and Magician exists, Spellbook of Power is even a thing. So the existence of this is really not approved. Spellbook Library of the Crescent is the polar opposite of this, and it functions if you have no Spellbook spell cards in your graveyard. You're allowed to reveal 3 Spellbook cards with different names from your deck, and your opponent randomly adds one of them to your hand, and shuffle the rest back into the deck. You can only activate one of these per turn, and you cannot activate any spell cards the turn you activate this effect, except Spellbook spell cards. Yeah, despite the obvious discrepancy in terms of how this deck is supposed to function, as in there will be a lot of spellbooks in your graveyard, this card is an excellent card to open up with, because you can actually score some additional spellbook spell cards when digging through your deck. So yeah, run a copy or two. Next up we have Spellbook Star Hall, their only continuous spell. Each time a spellbook spell card is activated, place one spell counter on this card. All spellcaster type monsters you control gain 100 attack for each spell counter on this card. When this card with spell counter is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can add one spellcaster type monster from your deck to your hand whose level is less than or equal to the number of spell counters that were on this card. Very slow and unreliable, and I would not recommend running it. There are much better spellcaster support in this day and age, so don't bother. And very much the same can be said about Spellbook Organization. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck, then return them to the top of the deck in any order. Just run Ancient Telescope if you want a card of this caliber. Moving on. And it's a quick play spell for some imbecilic reason as well. So no. Okay, next up we have Magical Citadel of Endymion, the aforementioned field spell for the Endymion lineup. Each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter on this card when that spell card resolves. If a card with a spell counter is destroyed, place spell counters on this card once per turn. If you would activate a card or effect by removing spell counters from a card you control, you can remove that many spell counters from this card instead. If this card would be destroyed, you can remove one spell counter from this card. Yeah, basically a very run-of-the-mill textbook example of an archetypal field spell that revolves around counters, that being utilizing counters in order to pump it with counters whenever you do something archetype related, such as activating spell cards, and protection by removing one of their counters, or basically fulfilling a quota of something that rely on using counters by using counters from this thing as opposed to using counters from said monster. So yeah, it's pretty fine for Endymion standards, so yeah, run 2 or 3 of these. Endymion's Lab is their other continuous spell, and this card's name becomes the Magical Citadel of Endymion while in the spell and trap zone. Each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter like the original field spell. And once per turn, after damage calculation, if your spellcaster monster is destroyed by battle, you can remove 6 spell counters from your field. Special summon one level 7 or higher spellcaster monster from your hand or deck, and you can only activate one Endymion's Lab per turn. Despite the not being the field spell, it really doesn't feel like a field spell that much, because the only benefit it offers is the special summon effect, which honestly a lot of other monsters fulfill its role even without it. So yeah, you basically sort of run it if you don't have much in the term, if you don't have much options to search out the field spell that fast, since terraforming and metaverse are limited, maybe, sort of, huh? But yeah, you get the point. Next up we have their final field spell, that being Magical Midbreaker Field, which is actually limited in the TCG. Activate this card at the start of your main phase 1 or 2. During each player's main phase 1, monsters on the field cannot be destroyed by their opponent's card effects. Also, neither player can target monsters with their opponent controls. You cannot activate or set field spell cards. Yeah, this is actually a set rotation with an extra layer of protection, so yeah, it's just that, a set rotation, one card set rotation with an extra layer of protection, and that's about it. Yeah, sure, you can utilize it if you want to pull off a fun lockdown deck, but no, I would not recommend it. Next up we have Arcane Barrier. Each time a spellcaster type monster on the field is destroyed, face up and place one spell counter on this card, max 4. You can send this card when one face up spellcaster monster you control to the graveyard, draw one card for each spell counter that was on this card. Okay, so this one is a nice draw power at the cost of being supremely slow. But yeah, in slower formats this used to be pretty okay and decent, but yeah, other than that it's pretty much nothing too amazing for this day and age. Next up we have Spell Power Mastery. Add one Endymion card from your deck to your hand. Then you can count the number of Spell Power Mastery and Spell Power Grasp you control and have in your graveyard. and place that many spell counters among the cards you control, and you can place a spell counter on. You can only activate on spell power mastery per turn, and only one spell mastery per turn. Yeah, just run 3 of these. You would be silly not to. Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything more. And what about this Spell Power Grasp? Well, it allows you to target a face-up card on the field that you can place a spell counter on. Place one spell counter on that target, then you can add one Spell Power Grasp from your deck to your hand. You can only activate one Spell Power Grasp per turn. You basically run it because of the first card and as a deck thinning option and maybe spell counter generation. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Next up we have Megaton Magical Cannon. Remove 10 spell counters on your side of the field, destroy all cards your opponent controls. So yeah, this is a very blatant nuke card, and it doesn't really screw around, and it basically drives that point home. It can be a bit tricky to generate 10 spell counters at once in order to make a quick use out of this thing, but making a fun deck out of this thing is usually a very nice thing to do, and is bound to give you a chuckle. Next up we have Mythical Institution, a quick play, continuous spell, what am I saying? Each time a face-up Mythical Beast Pendulum monster card you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, place 2 spell counters on this card. Once per turn you can remove any number of spell counters from your field and add one monster from your deck to your hand that you can place a spell counter on. If this card on the field would be destroyed by a card effect, you can remove one spell counter from this card instead. Yeah, it's just a beta version of the Endymion field spell, and not a very good one. And it also works with Mythical Beasts, of all things, so yeah, that makes it extra useless, so don't bother with this one. Next up we have Beast Magic Attack, a quick play spell. Remove spell counters from your field to activate one of these effects. 2. Return one Mythical Beast Pendulum monster you control to the hand. 4. Special summon one face-up Mythical Beast Pendulum monster from your extra deck, and then you can place 2 spell counters on it. Or 6. Special summon one face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck. You can only activate one Beast Magic Attack per turn. Again, Mythical Beast support is kind of unnecessary, well, since the archetype based around it is rather weak. So yeah, not particularly recommended. And their final spell card is Mythical Bestiary, a quick play spell. Send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard, then target one face-up card on the field that you can place a spell counter on, place up to 2 spell counters on it. If this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon one monster from your deck that you can place a spell counter on, and if you do, place up to 2 spell counters on it. You can only activate one Mythical Bestiary once per turn. Yeah, you can see that this isn't basically locked into Mythical Beast mode, and for all intents and purposes, it does its job as a serviceable. Not too amazing, but serviceable. So yeah, you can go wrong with a copy or 2, but don't run 3 of them, because yeah. Next up we have the trap cards, first of which is the last of the Mythical Beast in the lineup, Mythical Bestiamorph, a continuous trap. Each time an opponent's monster effect is activated, place 1 spell counter on this card, and when that effect resolves, you can send this card with 6 or more spell counters on it to the graveyard, add 1 spell from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Mythical Bestiamorph per turn. Searching out any spell card from your deck is actually really lovely, but relying on this slow effect in order to pull said search effect off isn't worth it, so neither is running this. Also, this is a trap card, so that makes it extra slow. Next up we have Pitch Black Power Stone, the other continuous trap card. Activate this card by placing 3 spell counters on it. Once per turn during your turn you can target one other face-up monster in the field that you can place a spell counter on. Remove 1 spell counter from this card, and if you do, place 1 spell counter on that target. When the last spell counter is removed from this card, destroy it. Yeah, well, this comes from a very early time when spell counters were very hard to generate, so this was some sort of a saving grace, but yeah, it doesn't feel like that way to me. Not back then, not today. And the final card of the archetype is Hidden Spellbook. Wait, there aren't actually. This isn't actually the final card. There are, I think, few cards that I missed. I know I missed one of them, I just remembered. But anyway, Hidden Spellbook. Final massive quotes card in the archetype. During your turn, you can target 2 spell cards in your graveyard, shuffle those targets into the deck. Don't you tell me what to do. Run Jar of Avarice instead of this. Okay, time for a bit of a round 2 since I missed some of the cards which are related to the archetype because they weren't on the goddamn page. So yeah, let's start. I missed 19 cards, surprisingly. But I shouldn't be too surprised because the majority of this is just random outdated garbage, so I won't spend my time too long here. The first out of these I missed is Frequency Magician, which I'm actually surprised that I missed because it's the only archetypal tuner and the archetype has 3 synchro monsters. Yes, there's even a synchro monster which I missed. And anyway, when this card is normal summon, you can place a spell counter on it, max 1, and you can remove a spell counter from this card to have one face-up monster you control gain 500 attack until the end phase. Yeah, just don't. You're just gonna be summoning this by the way of special summoning, and in order to actually use it for synchros, and not to mention that there are miles better spellcaster tuners than this thing in order to summon the set synchro monsters. Next up we have... Next up we have Magical Plant Mandragola, which is a level 2 flip effect monster that allows you to place a spell counter on each face-up card on the field that can place a spell counter on. Yeah, the Konami later took inspiration from this and designed Cloudy and Squall, a miles better card but still horribly slow and outdated, so I shouldn't really point out how bad this card is nowadays. Then we have Hannibal Necromancer, which when it's normal summoned allows you to place a spell counter on him max 1, and you can only use it to target a face-up trap card and destroy it. Yeah, very limited and very crappy and old. Let's just move on. Next up we have Alchemist of Black Spells, which allows you to once per turn change him from attack to defense position and place one spell counter on a face-up card that can have a spell counter on it. Again, very outdated and old, not worth the effort. Maiden of Macabre is a waste of an artwork in my opinion, because each time she destroys a monster she gains a spell counter and she gains 200 attack for each spell counter, basically an archetypal Garrett Hole if you will. Next up we have Blast Magician. Now this one is a bit interesting, because each time a spell card is activated, you can place a spell counter on this card, and when that spell resolves, and you can remove any number of spell counters from this card and target one face-up monster on the field with attack less than or equal to the number of spell counters you can remove times 700, destroy that monster. You can make this thing into a removal option, which can actually have a pretty decent removal pool, but it's still a targeting removal which is still very slow and unreliable, so I wouldn't recommend this one. Next up we have Dark Valkyria, which is basically a Breaker the Magical Warrior with for monsters, but his only fault is being a Gemini monster with more Evil Swarm stats, because why not? Next up we actually have something decent, Magical Exemplar. Each time a spell card is activated, place 2 spell counters on this card when that spell resolves. Once per turn you can remove any number of spell counters from this card, special summon one spellcaster or monster from your hand or graveyard whose level is equal to the number of spell counters you remove. So yeah, back in kind of slower formats, this used to be a very great option for both swarming and recovery, since she actually is a pretty versatile spell counter generator, and she even has 2 additional forms, one of which is nothing too impressive, but the other one, which is actually a pendulum monster, is a pretty busted card. So yeah, first of her forms is Magical Something. Yeah, that's what she's called. Anyway, each time a spell card is activated, place 1 spell counter on this card, and when that spell resolves, this card's level is increased by the number of spell counters on it, and you can remove 3 spell counters from this card and target 1 quick play spell in your graveyard and set that card to your spell and trap zone. You can only use this effect once per turn. In case you didn't notice, the archetype doesn't have many quick play spells. The only relevant one is Spellbook of Judgment, which is banned, but overall very great, so I guess the heart was in the right place. Anyway, next up we have another classic staple, that being Royal Magical Library, which allows it to hold 3 spell counters, and they gain 1 each time a spell card is activated, and you can remove 3 of them to draw 1 card. basically this Gear Free the Iron Knight and the Gear Free the Iron Knight are basically the reason why stuff like Butterfly Dagger Elma gets instantly banned, because you can actually perform an FTK, very easy FTK with those sorts of effects. And yeah, an archetypal upstart goblin like this, it's a really good card. And those are this is the last level 4. Now moving on to the tribute monsters, non-pendulum ones, that is. That being the first of which is Magical Marionette, which is very crappy and old. Simple targeting monster removal on top of a level 5 with terrible stats. No thanks. Disenchanter, which is again basically a different flavor of Hannibal the Necromancer of all things, and it actually bounces back continuous spell cards. So the only possible usage is bouncing back pendulum monsters, but the opponent can straight up activate them again. So if it destroyed them, then yeah, I would have seen more point, but as of now, I don't. Then we have Dark Red Enchanter, which allows you to, when it's normal summon, to place 2 spell counters on it, and each time a spell card is activated, it allows you to place another one on himself. Gains 300 attack for each spell counter, and once per turn you can remove 2 spell counters from this card. Discard 1 random card from your opponent's hand. Yeah, you can either build a gimmicky deck involving this, or build a gimmicky deck involving Claudian Altus. So, what do you prefer? Neither, because you tend to play Trickstar Reincarnation over any of this. Goodbye. Next up we have Magical Abductor, their last pendulum monster, which is a scale 3. And its pendulum effect is that each time a spell card is activated, place 1 spell counter. When it resolves once per turn, you can remove 3 spell counters from this card. Add 1 pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. And its monster effect is that each time a spell card is activated, place 1 spell counter. And gains 100 attack for each spell counter on it, and once per turn you can remove 3 spell counters from this card, add 1 level 1 spellcaster monster from your deck to your hand. The monster effect is, well, it can be versatile, as it allows you to add Effect Veiler to your hand, which is already pretty impressive by itself. But the real meat of this effect is its pendulum effect, which it allows you to add any pendulum monster in the entire game to your hand, which is absolutely bananas, and this is actually one of the best pendulum monsters in the entire game, and you should definitely run this thing. Next up we have the last Synchro monster, Explosive Magician, a level 6 with 2500 attack, which requires 1 tuner, 1 or more non-tuner spellcaster type monsters, and you can remove 2 spell counters from your side of the field to select and destroy 1 spell or trap card your opponent controls. Yeah, very crappy variation of MMST. There are way better cards that do the same thing for less cost. No thanks. Next up we have the Counter Trap Anti-Spell. Remove 2 spell counters on your side of the field to negate the activation of a spell card and destroy it. Then, yeah, back in the den, this was, this was a genuinely powerful card, as, in the concept, that is, because spell counters were still very hard to come by, but, yeah, in this day and age we have a much better option. Extra Buck is, well, extra draw power at the cost of expending very hard to generate spell counters, so yeah. Tower of Babel is a very gimmicky burn card, and Exhausting Spell is just, what the hell. So anyway, finally we get to the grading scale. Let's dish them out, shall we? In terms of consistency, they are pretty very good. I don't know what I just said there. They're very good in terms of generating consistency of the Spellbook engine and the monsters that revolve around the Spellbook. The Spellbook engine can kick themselves up more often than they have dead hands. Spellbooks are absolutely ridiculous in generating actual generic spellcaster support, so yeah, I am obligated to give them a 3 out of 3 there. In terms of power, spellbooks usually tend to produce massive extra deck boards in the dedicated decks that they're splashed into, or in their pure decks, and not so much, but still very notable, so I'm gonna give them a 2 out of 3 in that one. In terms of comeback ability, there is quite a bit of it. With the Spellbook of Judgment being banned by and then the comeback ability isn't hindered that much. There's still way too much ways and potential for these guys to get back after a board wipe or anything else that might have hindered them. So I'm gonna give them a 2 out of 3 there. Their protection is absolutely amazing, so I'll give them a 2 out of 3 at least for having some cohesion and the Spellbook of Wisdom. What else do I have to tell you? A very powerful card for its time. You can also stack multiples with the Spellbook of the Master. So yeah, a very formidable amount of protection and very searchable and very easy to pull off. Versatility obviously gets a 3 out of 3. It's their Spellbooks, generic spellcaster support. What else? What else do you want? Damn it! But yeah, this was basically the Spellbook archetype, the Spellbook / Prophecy archetype, I should be telling. So yeah, a very good and nicely managed lineup of cards. I'd definitely like to see more of them because their artworks and lore are very endearing to me and very interesting to study. So yeah, great archetype. Love to see it again in action someday in terms of new support. Anyway, that was it for this archetype analysis. The Code Breaker might be coming up shortly, maybe someday, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos, walkthroughs, and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. Check out the Patreon if you want to donate. Drop a donation if you feel like it to support the show. And I'll see you guys next time. See you all. Have a good day and peace.